Welcome to Voice Bootcamp, a global name in unified communication. Hello, my name is Faisal Khan, CEO and founder of VoiceBootcamp.com. In this lab, I'm going to show you how to prepare and install Microsoft SQL Server 64-bit. Now, SQL Server installation is pretty straightforward. So once you put the CD in and you just click on the setup link or whatnot, you'll see a screen that with the following screenshot. So you can click on to test any sort of like a operation setup support file check, any sort of supplementary file that you might need, and then it will tell you if there is any issues with the server setup or configuration, such as a warning and whatnot. This is an example and warning telling you that the computer where you're trying to install happens to be a domain controller. It is important that SQL Server is installed on every single server that is going to have Microsoft UCCE component. Anyway, so when you go to the section called Installation Type, you're going to select New Installation, and then of course define your keys, product keys, and it's going to ask you what sort of features you'd like to install. So you can just simply select the SQL Server feature installation. You can say all feature with default or whatnot. So these are some of the features you can select. Obviously for the lab purposes we can choose all of them, doesn't matter. Now here is very important, you should keep the default instance as a Microsoft MS SQL Server. If you choose to use a different name, sometimes the UCCE installation failed to detect that name. So it is important that you use the default one to go through the smooth installation. Now if the remember, this SQL Server that you are installing is only going to be dedicated for the UCCE. You're not going to run any sort of a separate application or database on that. Now at some point when you go to through the installation, one of the most important part is this one, server configuration. There obviously you're going to select the username and password for all these services. You can use the system account or domain account, totally up to you. See the circle area called collocation. You have to click on that tab and then select Latin1_general and binary. It is extremely important that these two items are configured exactly like this. If you fail to do that, you're going to have to reinstall SQL Server from scratch, because there is no way to go back and change it. So it is extremely important that you pay attention to this area where you are required to configure the collocation. It's a case sensitive, it's basically how the character sets are stored into the SQL Server. So once you check this, the rest stuff is pretty much installation is done. What we're going to do at that moment, once the installation is completed, you will go to the server, every server that is going to have the SQL Server. You're going to click on SQL Server 2000 R2 and then click where it says Server Configuration Tool. Click on Server Configuration Manager. Okay, so you expand this, and what is our goal here is to enable the name pipe. So first starts with the SQL Server network configuration. Click on protocol for SQL Server, and you want to make sure the name pipe is enabled. By default it is disabled, so you want to enable that option. So you can right click and go to disable and enable. Second, you have to go to the native client protocol and make sure the TCP is in the third place, name pipe is in the second. So to change that, you right click, go to order, and make sure TCP on the second, name pipe is at the top. Okay, you also need to do that right here, 32-bit client. So name pipe at the second, TCP on the third. So once you have done configuration of this SQL Server, you want to go to Services and restart the SQL Server by selecting the SQL Server and then click on Restart. If you do not restart, then this installation task doesn't get completed. Alright, so once the SQL Server is done, your next step is to go to SQL Server Management Studio. So it's extremely important that you log into this database as a domain account. So to find out what server you are, what username you'll use to log in, you can click on command prompt and then type who am I, and you see that username corp/administrator, because it's important for the security to be properly authenticated. So that's the server name, Progress A. You can use Windows authentication or SQL Server. UCCE requires both Windows authentication and SQL Server to be enabled. We're just going to use a Windows authentication. Click connect, and you want to right click on the server name, go to properties, under security, make sure SQL Server and Windows authentication mode is configured or check. If it is not, then you have to check this and of course restart the service once more. Second, you go to the security, you want to go to login, and you want to make sure the SA account is enabled. You notice how the SA account seems to be down, so you right click, the arrow key means down, so you go to properties, and you go to status. So you can put the password if you want to. You want to go to status and say enable. As soon as you do that, you'll see the name go, the red part will disappear. So you can refresh it. So now the SA account is enabled. Alright, so that's pretty much all there is that you need to do on the SQL Server. If everything is correct, then you move on to the next step, which is to install the base software. Now the base software is basically, go to computer, once done you go to your CD-ROM, you want to go to ICM CCE installer, and you want to click on setup. So this is to create the base install. Now what's going to happen is, when you finish this installation right here, it's going to populate the desktop with these following icons, which otherwise will not be there when you are installing SQL, for example. So after the SQL, you will still have a blank screen. So you will see this 3 icons on the desktop once you go through this installation. This is the base installation that you need to install on every single server that is going to have the UCCE component. So it is extremely important that you follow that. You want to click on next. It's going to confirm the security on the SQL Server. If you have if you have an update, for example ICM, or you want to update to a new version, you can download that, define that right here. You can click on next. It's going to check the Active Directory. It's going to ask you that SQL Server security needs to be hardened. You can click next, and then you're ready to go. So as soon as you click install, it's going to go through the installation. I'm not going to install that because it's already done. So I'm going to finish that. So once this installation is done, you are going to see these 3 icons on the desktop. At this stage, the server is still not a logger or a router. All it is just basically a server that has the base UCCE installation tools. So UCCE tools contains various components that we're going to use throughout our course to install various parts and components of the system. For example, if I want this server to become a peripheral gateway or PG, I will install the PG. If I want to create the database, I will use the ICM DBA. If I want to change some security or encryption, I will use the SSL encryption utility. If I want to log into the CLI to see the processes, I can go to System CLI. These tools can be accessed also by going to All Program, UCCE Tools, and right there. So that's pretty much it about the base installation of the UCCE and SQL Server preparation.